As the scanning continued, something strange happened. The humans noticed them. Vexter had expected this, of course. His ships were not trying to hide. But the speed and scale of the human reaction surprised him. Within minutes of the fleet's arrival, signals were flooding across the planet. News broadcasts interrupted their normal programming. Military channels lit up with frantic communications. Millions of humans looked up at the sky and saw the dark shapes of alien warships blocking out the sun. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, communication officers reported a surge in human activity. "They are mobilizing their military forces," one officer said. "Aircraft are launching from bases across the planet. Naval vessels are leaving port. Ground units are moving to defensive positions." Vexter nodded slowly. This was expected. Every species tried to resist at first. It was instinct. But once they understood the hopelessness of their situation, they would surrender. They always did. "Open a channel to the planet," he commanded. "All frequencies. I want every human to hear this." The communication officers worked quickly. Within moments, Vexter's image was being broadcast to every screen on Earth. His gray face and cold eyes appeared on televisions, computers, phones, and billboards. His voice, translated into every human language, echoed across the world. "Creatures of Earth," he began. "I am Supreme Commander Vexter of the Valorian Dominion. Your planet is now under our control. Resistance is not possible. Your weapons cannot harm us. Your ships cannot match ours. You have one planetary rotation to surrender unconditionally. If you comply, you will be allowed to live as servants of the Dominion. If you refuse, you will be destroyed. This is not a negotiation. This is your only warning." He ended the transmission and waited. On 100 other worlds, this moment had been followed by chaos and then capitulation. Leaders would argue, populations would panic, and eventually someone would step forward to surrender. It usually took less than a day. But as the hours passed, something unexpected happened. Instead of chaos, there was organization. Instead of panic, there was defiance. Human leaders began to respond, and their answer was not what Vexter had anticipated. The first response came from the president of the largest human nation. She was a small woman with gray hair and fierce eyes. Her voice did not shake as she spoke. "To the aliens in orbit," she said, "I speak for the United States of America, but I believe I speak for all of humanity. We will not surrender. We will not serve. We will fight you with everything we have, and we will never stop fighting until you are gone from our world. You have made a terrible mistake coming here." Other leaders followed. The heads of nations that had been enemies for generations stood together and delivered the same message. Russia, China, India, Europe, Africa, South America, every corner of the planet united in a single word: no. Vexter watched these responses with growing confusion. Did they not understand what they faced? Had they not seen the power of his fleet? He ordered a demonstration, a single plasma blast aimed at an uninhabited island in the Pacific Ocean. The beam lanced down from orbit and struck the island. There was a flash of blinding light, and then the island was simply gone, vaporized. Where land had been, there was only boiling sea. That was a warning. Vexter broadcast. "The next strike will not miss. Surrender now, or your cities will share that island's fate." The humans watched the destruction of the island. They saw the power that threatened them. And still, they did not surrender. Instead, they began to prepare. Across the planet, old enemies became allies. Military secrets were shared. Resources were pooled. Scientists who had spent their careers competing against each other began to work together. Factories that made cars started making weapons. Ordinary people lined up to volunteer for whatever was coming. Vexter observed all of this with growing frustration. The deadline he had given passed, and still no surrender came. Communications from the planet continued to be defiant. Some humans even sent insulting messages, mocking the Dominion and daring them to attack. "They are insane," War Minister Thrall said over the fleet communication channel. "They must be. No rational species would choose destruction over servitude." "Perhaps they do not believe we will actually destroy them," suggested Admiral Crix, commander of the fleet's left wing. "Perhaps they think we are bluffing. Then we will show them we are not," Vexter decided. "Prepare the ground forces. We will begin the invasion. Target their largest cities first. Once they see our soldiers in their streets, they will understand." The order went out across the fleet. Dropships began to load with troops. Attack craft powered up their engines. The invasion of Earth was about to begin. But in the Temple of Records, far away on the Valorian home world, an old keeper read the ancient words of Commander Solus once more. "If we do not end them now," the text warned, "our descendants will regret it." The keeper looked up at the stars, toward the distant blue world where the fleet was gathering. He wondered if the warning had come too late, and if the Dominion truly understood what it had found. The humans did not know it yet, but they were about to face the fight of their lives. Everything they had built, everything they had achieved, would be tested in the fires of war. Nations would fall. Cities would burn. Millions would die. But humanity had faced extinction before. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that had killed hundreds of millions. They were the descendants of survivors, the children of those who had refused to die no matter what the universe threw at them. The Valorians thought they were coming to conquer sheep. They were about to discover that they had found wolves instead, and the wolves were getting ready to bite back. The probe had been drifting through the cold darkness of space for almost 200 years. It was old technology by Valorian standards, a simple machine built to do one thing: search. It searched for radio signals, heat signatures, and signs of life. For 2 centuries, it had found nothing but dead rocks and empty void. Then, on a day that would change the history of the galaxy, the probe detected something. Faint radio waves were coming from a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. The signals were crude and simple, but they were unmistakably artificial. Someone was out there. Someone was alive. The probe sent its findings back to the Valorian Dominion. The message traveled across thousands of light years, bouncing from relay station to relay station until it reached the heart of the Empire. When the Supreme Council received the report, there was silence in the great chamber for a long time. High Priest Zolan was the first to speak. His voice was old and tired, but it carried the weight of 3,000 years of searching. "We found them," he said. "After all this time, we finally found them. The 13th seed, that was what the ancient records called them. 3,000 years ago, during the time known as the Great Purge, the Valorian Dominion had tried to wipe out 13 primitive species. 12 had been completely destroyed, but the 13th had escaped. A few thousand of them had fled into the unknown regions of the galaxy, and the Dominion had lost track of them. For 3 millennia, the Valorians had searched, not because they feared these primitives, but because they hated loose ends. The Dominion was built on order and control. A species that had escaped their judgment was an insult to everything they believed in. Now, at last, the search was over. Supreme Commander Vexter stood before the council and studied the data on the floating screens. He was tall even by Valorian standards, with gray skin and eyes that had seen 100 worlds burn. He had led cleansing fleets for 2 centuries, and he had never failed. "The species calls itself humanity," he reported. "They have spread across their entire planet. Population estimates suggest approximately 8 billion individuals." A murmur went through the council. 8 billion was an enormous number. Most species the Dominion conquered had populations in the millions. How had these primitives grown so fast? Baxter continued. They have developed basic space travel. They have visited their moon and sent machines to nearby planets. They have split the atom and created weapons of significant destructive power. He paused. They also appear to be constantly at war with each other. Elder Mira leaned forward. She was the oldest member of the council, nearly 1,000 years old. They fight among themselves? Even with such large numbers? Constantly, Vexter confirmed. Their history is filled with conflict. They wage war over territory, resources, ideology, and sometimes for reasons our analysts cannot understand. They are a violent and chaotic species. Then they will be easy to conquer, said War Minister Thryle. He was young and eager, always hungry for battle. A species divided against itself cannot stand against us. But High Priest Zolan shook his head slowly. Do not be so certain. The ancient records speak of the 13th seed with caution. Our ancestors called them the survivors. They said these creatures had a strange resilience. Superstition, Thrall dismissed. Our ancestors did not have our technology. They did not have our weapons. These humans are primitives with chemical rockets and simple atomic bombs. We have plasma cannons and ships that bend space itself. This will not be a war. It will be an extermination. The council debated for many hours. Some wanted to simply destroy the planet from orbit, to glass the surface and be done with it. Others argued for subjugation, for adding human slaves to the Dominion's workforce. A few, like High Priest Zolan, urged caution and further study. In the end, Supreme Commander Vexter made the decision. We will conquer them, he declared. We will show them the power of the Dominion and give them one chance to surrender. If they refuse, we will crush them. But we will not simply destroy them from space. That would be wasteful. 8 billion workers could serve the Dominion for generations. The Council agreed. A cleansing fleet was assembled, 400 warships, 50,000 ground troops, and enough firepower to level continents. It was more than Vexter usually brought to a conquest, but the sheer size of the human population required extra forces. As the fleet prepared to depart, Vexter visited the Temple of Records. He wanted to see the ancient texts about the 13th seed for himself. The temple was dark and quiet, filled with data crystals that held the history of the Dominion. A temple keeper guided him to the oldest section, where the records of the Great Purge were stored. Vexter activated a crystal and watched as holographic text floated in the air before him. The record was written by a commander named Silas, who had led the original purge 3,000 years ago. His words were strange and disturbing. The 13th seed is unlike the others, Silas had written. They do not freeze in fear when faced with death. They do not surrender when outmatched. They fight with a fury that defies logic. We destroyed their cities, and they attacked us from the ruins. We killed their warriors, and their farmers picked up weapons. We burned their fields, and they ate their dead rather than starve. They are not rational. They are not sane. They are something else entirely. Vexter frowned at these words. Silas had been considered one of the greatest commanders in Dominion history. Why would he write such things about primitives? He read on. I recommend that the council pursue them into the void. Do not let them escape. Do not let them grow. Given enough time, I believe these creatures will become a threat unlike any we have faced. They adapt too quickly. They learn too fast. They breed like insects and fight like demons. If we do not end them now, our descendants will regret it. But the council of that era had ignored Solas's warning. The 13th seed had fled too far, and the cost of pursuing them was deemed too high. So the matter was forgotten, filed away in these dusty records. Vexter closed the crystal and stood in silence for a long moment. Then he laughed softly. Solus had been afraid of primitives who fought with sticks and stones. 3,000 years later, those primitives had only reached basic space travel. They were still children playing with toys. The Supreme Commander left the temple and boarded his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. It was the largest warship in the fleet, nearly 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. From its bridge, Vexter would watch humanity kneel. The fleet departed from the Valorian homeworld with great ceremony. Thousands gathered to watch the ships rise into the sky. This was a moment of triumph, the completion of a hunt that had lasted 3 millennia. Soon, the last loose end would be tied. The Great Purge would finally be complete. The journey to Earth took 6 standard months. The fleet traveled through the void between stars, jumping from point to point, using technology that bent the fabric of space. During the journey, Vexter studied everything the probe had gathered about humanity. He watched their broadcasts, which they carelessly sent out into space for anyone to receive. He saw their news programs, their entertainment, their advertisements. He learned about their nations and their conflicts. He studied their history, which was indeed filled with endless war. What struck him most was their diversity. Unlike the Valorians, who had engineered themselves into uniformity over millennia, humans came in countless variations. Different skin colors, different languages, different beliefs. They disagreed about everything. They fought each other constantly. Half of them seemed to hate the other half. This confirmed what War Minister Thrall had said. A species so divided could not possibly unite against an external threat. When the Dominion arrived, the humans would be too busy fighting each other to mount any real resistance. Vexter also studied human military technology. It was primitive, as expected. Their fastest aircraft could not match the speed of Valorian interceptors. Their most powerful bombs were firecrackers compared to plasma weapons. Their ground forces used chemical propellant weapons that would barely scratch Valorian armor. The only thing that gave him pause was their numbers. 8 billion was simply an enormous population. Even if each human was weak, there were so many of them. Killing them all would take time and resources. It would be far better if they surrendered. The fleet emerged from its final jump on a clear autumn morning, Earth time. The blue planet hung in space before them, beautiful and fragile. Around it orbited a single gray moon, where humans had walked decades ago but never returned. Vexter looked at the world that had hidden from the Dominion for 3,000 years. It was small. Tiny, really. How had such a small planet produced 8 billion creatures? These humans bred like parasites. Begin scanning, he ordered. Identify major population centers, military installations, and communication networks. The fleet spread out around Earth, taking positions in orbit. Human satellites were swept aside like insects. A few primitive spacecraft were captured and examined. The humans inside were taken for study. They were small, soft creatures with fragile bodies. Vexter could not understand how such beings had survived at all. The dropships descended from the sky like metal rain. There were thousands of them, dark shapes falling through the clouds toward the cities below. Inside each ship, 50 Valorian soldiers sat in silence, checking their weapons and armor. They had done this many times before on many worlds. They expected no real resistance. Supreme Commander Vexter watched the invasion begin from the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. Holographic displays showed him the entire planet at once. Red dots marked the landing zones: New York, Beijing, Moscow, London, Tokyo, and dozens of other major cities. The plan was simple. Take the capitals, capture the leaders, and break the will of the population. It had worked on every other world. The first dropships landed in Central Park, in the heart of New York City. The Valorian soldiers poured out with practiced efficiency, their plasma rifles raised and ready. They expected screaming civilians and perhaps a few brave police officers with useless weapons. Instead, they found barricades. The humans had worked through the night. They had piled cars, buses, and chunks of concrete across every street leading into the park. Behind these barriers crouched thousands of defenders, soldiers, police, and ordinary citizens who had refused to flee. They had hunting rifles, shotguns, pistols, and in some cases, nothing but baseball bats and kitchen knives. For a long moment, the two sides stared at each other. The Valorians were confused. On other worlds, populations scattered before them. They ran and hid and begged for mercy. These humans were doing none of those things. A Valorian captain named Drax stepped forward. He activated his translator and shouted at the barricades. "Put down your weapons. You cannot win. Surrender and you will be spared." The answer came from a young woman standing on top of an overturned taxi. She was wearing a police uniform and holding a shotgun. Her name was Officer Maria Santos, and she was terrified. But her voice did not shake when she spoke. "This is our home," she shouted back. "You want it? Come and take it." Then she raised her shotgun and fired. The pellets bounced harmlessly off the Valorian captain's armor. He looked down at the tiny dents and laughed. "Your weapons are useless," he said. "We are protected by shields that can stop artillery. Your primitive guns are nothing but toys." But Officer Santos smiled grimly. "The guns are just to get your attention," she said. "This is the real welcome." Behind her, on the rooftops of the buildings surrounding the park, something moved. Vexter, watching from orbit, suddenly saw dozens of heat signatures appear on his screens. The humans had hidden heavy weapons all around the landing zone, anti-tank missiles, rocket launchers, and experimental railguns that their military had been testing. Everything fired at once. The first volley caught the mice, Valorians completely by surprise. Missiles slammed into dropships that had not yet finished unloading. Railgun rounds, traveling at incredible speeds, punched through armor that was supposed to be impenetrable. Soldiers who had expected an easy conquest found themselves fighting for their lives. Captain Drax dove for cover as explosions erupted around him. His shield flickered and failed under the concentrated fire. A rocket struck the ground beside him, and he felt something he had not felt in centuries of warfare: fear. This was not supposed to happen. Primitive species were supposed to break. They were supposed to run. They were not supposed to fight like this. All across the planet, similar scenes played out. In Beijing, Chinese soldiers had prepared underground tunnels that let them appear behind the invaders. In Moscow, Russian defenders had rigged entire city blocks with explosives. In London, civilians threw Molotov cocktails from windows while soldiers fired from every doorway. The Valorians had expected to walk into surrendered cities. Instead, they walked into traps. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Supreme Commander Vexter watched the casualty reports with growing disbelief. In the first hour of the invasion, he had lost nearly 500 soldiers. On most worlds, he lost fewer than that in an entire campaign. "This is impossible," Admiral Crix said over the communication channel. "They should be fleeing." "Why are they not fleeing?" "Because they are insane," War Minister Thrall replied. His voice was no longer eager. It was troubled. They would rather die than surrender. What kind of species chooses death? Vexter said nothing. He was remembering the words of Commander Solis from 3,000 years ago. They fight with a fury that defies logic. At the time, he had dismissed those words as superstition. Now he was not so sure, but he was still Supreme Commander, and he still had 400 warships in orbit. The humans were fighting hard, but they were still primitives with primitive weapons. He would simply use more force. "Bring up the orbital batteries," he ordered. Target the defensive positions around each landing zone. Clear a path for our troops. The order was carried out. Plasma beams lanced down from space, turning barricades into slag and buildings into craters. The human defenders died by the thousands. Their improvised fortifications were no match for weapons that could crack continents. But even as they died, the humans kept fighting. When one barricade fell, defenders retreated to the next one. When their heavy weapons were destroyed, they picked up rifles. When their rifles ran out of ammunition, they threw rocks. They simply would not stop. Officer Maria Santos survived the orbital bombardment that destroyed most of her position. She crawled out of the rubble with blood running down her face and one arm hanging useless at her side. Around her, the park had become a hellscape of fire and smoke. Most of her fellow defenders were dead, but she could still hear gunfire. Somewhere, people were still fighting. She picked up a fallen soldier's rifle and limped toward the sound. A Valorian trooper stepped out of the smoke in front of her. He was tall and armored and completely unhurt. He raised his plasma rifle and pointed it at her chest. "Surrender," he said. "You are beaten. There is no point in dying." Santos looked at the alien. She thought about her family, about her city, about everything humanity had built. Then she thought about living as a slave to these creatures who had come to steal her world. "You first," she said, and raised her rifle. She knew she would probably die. Her weapon probably could not even hurt him. But she would not kneel. She would not beg. If she was going to die, she would die on her feet, fighting. The Valorian hesitated. He had seen this look before, on this world, in the eyes of too many humans. It was not the look of a beaten enemy. It was the look of someone who had already accepted death and was no longer afraid of anything. Before he could fire, a rocket streaked out of the smoke and struck him in the back. His armor cracked, and he fell. Behind him, a group of teenage boys emerged from the ruins, carrying homemade weapons they had built in their school's workshop. "Are you okay, ma'am?" one of them asked. Santos stared at them. They were children. They should have been in school, worrying about homework and dates. Instead, they were fighting aliens with weapons they had made themselves. "I'm fine," she said. "Let's go find more of these bastards." Together, they disappeared into the smoke. The battle for New York raged for 3 days. The Valorians eventually took the city, but they paid a terrible price. More than 2,000 of their soldiers died in the streets of Manhattan alone. The humans lost far more, but they made the invaders bleed for every block. And it was the same everywhere. In every city on Earth, the Valorians faced the same furious resistance. Humans fought from buildings, from sewers, from subway tunnels. They set traps and ambushes. They attacked supply lines. They refused to accept defeat. After the first week of fighting, Supreme Commander Vexter called a council of war aboard the Eternal Dominion. His admirals and generals gathered in the Great Hall, and for the first time in his long career, Vexter saw doubt on their faces. "We have taken most of the major cities," General Krex reported, "but we cannot hold them. The humans attack us constantly. They emerge from hiding, strike, and disappear. We kill hundreds of them, and more appear. They are everywhere. Their governments have collapsed," Admiral Krex added. "We captured or killed most of their leaders in the initial assault. But it did not break them. If anything, they fight harder now. They have formed resistance groups in every region. They share information and coordinate attacks without any central command." War Minister Thrall looked at the casualty reports and shook his head. "We have lost more soldiers in 1 week than we lost in the last century of conquest. This is not an invasion anymore. This is a war." Vexter stood at the head of the table, his hands clasped behind his back. He had underestimated these humans. He had thought they would break like every other species. He had been wrong. But he was not ready to admit defeat. The Dominion had never been defeated, not once in 3,000 years. He would not be the commander who lost to primitives. "We will change our strategy," he announced. "We will not try to hold cities. We will destroy them. We will burn this planet until the humans have nothing left to fight for. Then they will surrender." The other commanders exchanged uneasy glances. Total destruction was rare. It was wasteful. But if these humans would not submit any other way, perhaps it was necessary. The fleet began its new campaign. Cities that had been merely occupied were now reduced to rubble. Orbital bombardments rained down on any population center that showed resistance. Rivers were poisoned. Farmland was burned. The Valorians tried to break humanity through sheer devastation. But even this did not work. The humans scattered into the countryside. They hid in forests, mountains, deserts, and caves. They continued to fight. They attacked Valorian patrols and raided supply depots. They captured weapons and learned to use them. They built hidden bases and secret communication networks. And they learned. This was the thing that truly frightened the Valorians. Other species fought until they realized they could not win, and then they gave up. Humans fought and learned at the same time. Every battle taught them something new about their enemy. Within weeks, human engineers were studying captured Valorian technology. They figured out how the plasma rifles worked. They learned the weaknesses in Valorian armor. They reverse-engineered communication devices and began to intercept enemy transmissions. A scientist named Dr. James Chun made the first major breakthrough. Working in an underground bunker beneath the ruins of Hong Kong, he discovered that Valorian shields had a specific frequency. If you hit them with the right energy pulse, they would fail for a few seconds. It was not much, but it was enough. The information spread across the global resistance network within hours. Suddenly, Valorian soldiers who had felt invincible began to fall. Their shields flickered out at crucial moments, and human bullets found their mark. Dr. Chun did not survive to see the full impact of his discovery. A Valorian strike team found his bunker and destroyed it. But before he died, he transmitted all of his research to a dozen other hidden laboratories. His work continued without him. This was something the Valorians could not understand. When a Valorian scientist died, his knowledge often died with him. The Dominion was built on hierarchy and secrecy. Information flowed from the top down, not sideways. But humans shared everything. They posted their discoveries on whatever communication networks still functioned. They taught each other. A breakthrough made in South America would be used in Europe within days. Every human who knew something taught it to others before they died. Supreme Commander Vexter began to understand that he was facing something new. This was not a species. It was a swarm. Cut off one head and 10 more appeared. Destroy one city, and the survivors scattered to form new resistance cells. Kill one scientist, and his knowledge spread to 100 others. 2 months into the invasion, Vexter received a report that made his blood run cold. His intelligence officers had intercepted human communications, discussing a coordinated global counterattack. The humans were planning something big. "That is impossible," Admiral Crix insisted. "They have no central command. They have no organization. How can they coordinate a global attack?" But the evidence was clear. Resistance groups from every continent were sharing information. They were timing their operations. They were preparing to strike. Vexter looked out at Earth through the windows of his bridge. The blue planet was scarred now, marked with the black wounds of orbital bombardment. Clouds of smoke hung over the ruins of great cities. But beneath that destruction, something was stirring. Something was growing. The humans were not breaking. They were adapting. They were learning. And they were getting ready to fight back. For the first time in his long career, Supreme Commander Vexler felt something he had never felt before: uncertainty. He had conquered 100 worlds. He had never lost. But he had also never faced anything like this. On the surface of Earth, in the basement of a ruined church somewhere in the Swiss Alps, a woman named Maria Santos gathered with other resistance leaders from around the world. They communicated through salvaged equipment and encrypted channels. They came from every nation, every background, every walk of life. 3 months ago, many of them had been enemies. Now, they were united by a single purpose. Santos had come a long way from that first day in Central Park. She had lost her arm in the fighting and replaced it with a crude prosthetic made from Valorian technology. She had killed more aliens than she could count. She had watched friends die and cities burn. But she had not given up. None of them had. "The enemy thinks they have broken us," she told the gathering. "They think we are scattered and weak. They are wrong. We are not scattered. We are everywhere. And we are about to show them what humanity can do when we fight as one." The plan was audacious. It was dangerous. Many of them would die. But for the first time since the invasion began, humanity was going on the offensive. The Valorians had started this war. Humanity was going to finish it. Above them, in orbit, the alien fleet waited. They did not know what was coming. They still thought they were winning. They still believed that victory was only a matter of time. They were about to learn otherwise. The battle for Earth was about to enter its next phase. And nothing would ever be the same again. 6 months had passed since the Valorians came to Earth. The world had changed beyond recognition. Great cities lay in ruins. Billions of people had died. The old nations had crumbled, their governments destroyed or scattered. But humanity had not fallen dead in the mountains of Switzerland. Deep beneath what had once been a luxury hotel, the Earth Defense Coalition had built its headquarters. It was not much to look at, a maze of tunnels and bunkers powered by stolen generators and lit by flickering lights. But it was the heart of human resistance, and it never stopped beating. General Maria Santos stood before a wall of screens, watching reports come in from around the world. She was not the same woman who had stood behind a barricade in Central Park 6 months ago. That woman had been a police officer, trained to protect a single city. Now she commanded the largest guerrilla force in history. That her missing arm had been replaced with something better than flesh. Human engineers, working with captured Valorian technology, had built her a prosthetic that was stronger and faster than any natural limb. It was a symbol of what humanity had become: broken but not beaten, damaged but rebuilt into something new. "Report from the Asian theater," said Colonel Chun, her second in command. He was the nephew of Dr. James Chen, the scientist who had cracked the secret of Valorian shields. Like his uncle, he had a gift for turning alien technology against its makers. The resistance in Indonesia has captured another supply depot: 30 plasma rifles, 2 hover vehicles, and a portable shield generator. Santos nodded. "Tell them to distribute the rifles to the best marksmen. The vehicles go to the Madagascar cell. They need mobility. And send the shield generator to Dr. Okonko's lab in Nigeria. She's working on something that could change everything." "The African theater also reports success," Chun continued. "The ambush in Kenya killed 60 Valorian soldiers. Our losses were heavy, but the enemy is pulling back from the entire region. And in Europe? Mixed results. The Paris cell was destroyed, but the survivors have linked up with the London Underground. The Valorians are struggling to hold their positions in Germany. They control the cities, but the countryside belongs to us." This was the pattern everywhere. The Valorians had the firepower to destroy anything they could find. But they could not find everything. Humanity had learned to hide, to move, to strike from the shadows and disappear. The aliens controlled the sky, But humans owned the ground. Santos walked to another screen, where a map showed the global situation. Red areas marked Valorian control. Blue areas were contested. Green areas belonged to the Resistance. 6 months ago, the map had been almost entirely red. Now it was a patchwork of colors, with green spreading slowly but steadily. "We are winning," she said quietly. "Slowly, but we are winning." "The enemy does not think so," Chun replied. "They still believe they can crush us with enough force. Intelligence suggests they are preparing another major offensive." Santos smiled grimly. "Let them come. Every offensive they launch costs them more soldiers. They have a limited supply. We do not." This was the cruel math of the war. The Valorians had come with 50,000 soldiers, enough to conquer any normal world 10 times over. But they had already lost nearly 20,000. Their replacements had to travel from across the galaxy, a journey of months. Meanwhile, humanity's numbers grew every day. Every teenager who turned 18 joined the Resistance. Every child who watched their parents die swore revenge. The Valorians were running out of soldiers. Humanity was not running out of people willing to fight, but numbers alone were not enough. The Resistance needed better weapons, better tactics, and better intelligence. Santos had built an organization to provide all three. The weapons came from captured technology and human ingenuity. All over the world, hidden laboratories worked to understand and improve alien devices. Some of the breakthroughs were small: a way to make plasma rifles lighter, a method to extend battery life in Valorian equipment. Others were revolutionary. Dr. Amara Okonkwo's was responsible for the biggest revolution of all. Working in a bunker beneath the Nigerian jungle, she had cracked the secret of Valorian propulsion technology. The aliens used something called gravity manipulation to fly their ships and hover vehicles. Okonkwo had figured out how to build her own version. "It is not pretty," she admitted when Santos visited her lab. The device she had built looked like a pile of scrap metal held together with tape and prayers. But when she activated it, the pile rose off the ground and floated silently in the air. "But it works. Give me 3 months and a factory, and I can build enough of these to put our soldiers in the sky." Santos looked at the floating machine and felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. For 6 months, the Valorians had owned the air. Their dropships and fighters could strike anywhere, anytime. Human resistance had been limited to the ground. But if humans could fly too, everything would change. "You will have your factory," Santos promised. "And anything else you need." Tactics came from studying the enemy. The Valorians were excellent soldiers, disciplined, well-trained, and equipped with the best technology in the galaxy. But they had weaknesses. The biggest weakness was their command structure. Valorian soldiers did not think for themselves. They followed orders from their superiors, who followed orders from their superiors, all the way up to Supreme Commander Vexter. If you cut the chain of command, the soldiers below became confused and ineffective. Human resistance fighters had learned to target officers first. Every ambush focused on killing or capturing leaders. Without their commanders, Valorian units made mistakes. They hesitated. They retreated when they should have advanced. They were not used to thinking independently. Humans, by contrast, were the opposite. Every resistance fighter could act alone if necessary. They did not need orders from above. They understood the goal, and they found their own ways to achieve it. When communications went down, they kept fighting. When leaders died, others stepped up. The resistance was not an army. It was a network, and networks were very hard to kill. The third advantage was intelligence. The Valorians had underestimated human technology in many ways, but their biggest mistake was ignoring computers. Before the invasion, humanity had been on the edge of a digital revolution. Billions of computers, phones, and devices were connected in a global network. The Valorians had destroyed much of this infrastructure, but they had not destroyed all of it. And what remained was incredibly powerful. A young man named Marcus Lee had built the Resistance's intelligence network. He was only 19 years old, a college student who had been studying computer science when the invasion began. Now he commanded a network of hackers, engineers, and analysts spread across 6 continents. The Valorians use encryption that should be unbreakable, he explained to Santos during a video briefing. His face flickered on the screen, transmitted through cables hidden beneath the ocean. But they made a mistake. They assumed no one would ever try to break it. They got lazy. They used the same codes for months without changing them. And you broke the codes? Marcus grinned. Not just broke them. We are inside their entire communication network. We know when they are planning attacks. We know where their supply lines run. We know which commanders are arguing with each other and which units are running low on ammunition. This intelligence had saved thousands of lives. Resistance fighters knew when to hide and when to attack. Ambushes were planned with perfect information about enemy movements. The Valorians could not understand how the humans always seemed to know what they were going to do. 6 months into the war, the Resistance was stronger than ever. But Santos knew that strength was not enough. The Valorians still had their fleet in orbit. They could still bomb any position they discovered. As long as those ships controlled the sky, humanity could not truly win. She needed to find a way to strike at the fleet itself. The idea came from an unlikely source. A captured Valorian officer, broken after weeks of interrogation, revealed something that changed everything. The command ship, he said, his voice weak and defeated. The Eternal Dominion. It controls everything. The Supreme Commander directs all operations from there. If it falls, the fleet falls. Santos leaned forward. How do we reach it? It is in orbit, protected by hundreds of warships. The officer laughed bitterly. You cannot reach it. It is impossible. The ship has shields that can stop nuclear weapons. The only way aboard is through the transport tubes, and those are heavily guarded. Transport tubes? For supplies and personnel. Small ships dock at ports on the lower hull, but they are scanned and searched. You could never get weapons through. Santos thought about this for a long time. The officer was right that a conventional attack was impossible. But humanity had learned that impossible was just a word, a wall to be climbed or broken. She called a meeting of her best minds. Dr. Okonkwo, Marcus Lee, Colonel Chun, and a dozen others who had proven themselves in the war. She presented the problem and asked for solutions. We cannot fight our way to the command ship, she said. But perhaps we do not need to fight. Perhaps we need to be clever. The planning took weeks. Ideas were proposed, tested, and rejected. Slowly, a plan began to take shape. It was insane. It was desperate. It had almost no chance of success. But it was their only option. The plan had 3 parts. First, the Resistance would launch attacks across the globe simultaneously. Every cell, every fighter, every weapon would be committed to a single day of maximum violence. The goal was not to win any particular battle, but to create chaos. The Valorians would have to respond, pulling their attention in 100 directions at once. Second, while the enemy was distracted, a small team would infiltrate the orbital defenses. Using captured Valorian equipment and stolen codes, they would board a supply ship heading for the Eternal Dominion, Dr. Okonkwo's gravity devices. Miniaturized and hidden, would serve as weapons that could pass through scanners. Third, once aboard the command ship, the team would fight their way to the reactor core. There, they would trigger an overload that would destroy the Eternal Dominion and kill Supreme Commander Vexter. Without their command ship and leader, the Valorian fleet would fall into confusion. The team will not survive, Colonel Chun said quietly. Everyone in the room knew it. Getting to the reactor core was a one-way trip. Whoever went would not be coming back. Santos nodded. I know. I will lead the team myself. General, you cannot. The Resistance needs you. The Resistance needs to win. And I will not ask anyone to do something I am not willing to do myself. The room was silent. Every person there understood what Santos was proposing. She was going to trade her life for a chance to save humanity. It was not a sacrifice she was making lightly, but it was a sacrifice she was prepared to make. I will need volunteers, she continued. Soldiers who understand what we are doing and why. People who are willing to die for something bigger than themselves. She expected hesitation. She expected fear. Instead, every hand in the room went up. In the end, Santos chose a team of 20. They were the best humanity had to offer. Soldiers who had survived countless battles. Engineers who understood Valorian technology. Hackers who could disable security systems. They came from different nations and spoke different languages, but they shared a single purpose. Captain James Okonkwo, nephew of Dr. Amara Okonkwo, led the technical team. He had inherited his aunt's genius and his father's courage. At 25, he had already destroyed more Valorian equipment than anyone in the Resistance. Sergeant Yuki Tanaka was the team's close combat specialist. Before the invasion, she had been an Olympic martial artist. Now she had learned to kill with Valorian blades and human fury. She had lost her entire family in the Tokyo bombardment and had nothing left but revenge. Lieutenant Avad Hassan commanded the soldiers. He was a quiet man who rarely spoke, but when he did, people listened. He had escaped from a Valorian prison camp and had walked 300 miles through enemy territory to rejoin the Resistance. Nothing scared him anymore. The others were equally remarkable. A Russian sniper who never missed, an Indian explosives expert who could make a bomb from anything, a Brazilian medic who had saved hundreds of lives, and more. They were humanity's best hope. The day before the mission, Santos gathered her team in a hidden hangar where their captured transport waited. The ship looked battered and ordinary, exactly like the dozens of supply vessels that traveled to and from the Eternal Dominion every day. I will not lie to you, she told them. Most of us will die tomorrow. Perhaps all of us. But if we succeed, we will break the enemy's grip on Earth. We will give humanity a chance to win this war. She looked at each of them in turn. You are not just soldiers. You are the best of what we are. When the history of this war is written, they will remember your names. They will remember what you did. And they will know that humanity did not fall because people like you refused to let it. Captain Okonkwo stepped forward. General, with respect, we do not care about history. We care about the people down there. He pointed toward the ceiling, toward the surface above them, toward the billions of humans still fighting and dying. We care about giving them a future. That is why we are here. The others nodded. They were not here for glory or fame. They were here because someone had to be. They were here because humanity needed heroes, and they had chosen to answer the call. Santa smiled. For the first time in months, she felt something like peace. Whatever happened tomorrow, she knew that she had found the best of humanity and led them to this moment. Whatever happened, she was proud. Then let us show the Valorians what heroes look like, she said. Tomorrow we take back our sky. Above them, in orbit, the Eternal Dominion waited. Supreme Commander Vexter sat on his command throne, unaware that his death was coming. He still believed he was winning. He still thought humanity would break. He was about to learn the truth. The longest night began to pass. Across the planet, Resistance fighters prepared for the biggest operation in human history. Weapons were checked. Prayers were said. Messages were sent to loved ones who might never see them again. And in a hidden hangar, 20 humans boarded a battered ship and flew toward the stars. Operation Prometheus had begun. The morning of the attack dawned gray and cold over most of the Earth. Clouds hung low, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. In resistance bunkers and hidden camps across every continent, fighters checked their weapons one last time and said their final prayers at exactly 6 o'clock, Greenwich Mean Time. The world exploded. In South America, resistance cells attacked every Valorian position simultaneously. In Europe, saboteurs destroyed power stations and communication hubs. In Asia, thousands of fighters emerged from hiding and struck enemy patrols across 36 countries. In Africa, the accumulated weapons of 6 months of raids were finally unleashed. The Valorians had faced attacks before, but nothing like this. This was not a raid or an ambush. This was war on a scale they had never experienced. Alarms blared in every command center. Officers screamed for reinforcements that could not arrive in time. For the first time since the invasion began, the aliens were overwhelmed. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Supreme Commander Vexter stared at the holographic displays in disbelief. The entire planet was on fire. Hundreds of reports flooded in every minute, each one describing another disaster. His forces were stretched thin across too many fronts, unable to concentrate enough strength to crush any single attack. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "They are primitives. They should not be capable of this level of coordination." Admiral Crick stood beside him, his face pale. "Supreme Commander, we have underestimated them. Again, they have been planning this for months. Every cell, every fighter, every weapon they have collected, they are using everything at once. Then, we will respond with everything we have. Order all units to defensive positions. Launch orbital strikes on the largest concentrations of enemy forces." But the orders took time to reach scattered units. Communications were jammed or destroyed. Valorian soldiers who had grown used to easy victories found themselves fighting for their lives against enemies who seemed to know exactly where they would be and how they would respond. While the ground burned, a small ship slipped through the chaos. General Maria Santos sat in the pilot's seat of the captured transport, her mechanical arm steady on the controls. Behind her, 19 of the best fighters humanity had ever produced waited in silence. They wore captured Valorian armor and carried weapons hidden inside their bodies. Each had undergone surgery to implant Dr. Okonkwo's gravity devices beneath their skin, weapons that no scanner could detect. The transport rose through Earth's atmosphere and headed toward the fleet. Santos watched the warships grow larger on the view screen. There were hundreds of them, dark and terrible, blocking out the stars. Any one of them could destroy her little ship in an instant. "Approaching checkpoint," Captain Okonkwo reported from the sensor station. "Broadcasting our stolen codes now." This was the first moment of truth. If the Valorians had changed their codes, if someone recognized that this particular transport had been reported missing, if anything went wrong at all, they would die in a flash of plasma fire. Seconds passed. Then a voice crackled over the radio. "Transport 473, you are cleared for approach to the Eternal Dominion. Proceed to docking bay 12. Santos released a breath she did not know she had been holding. Acknowledged, Control. Proceeding to bay 12. The transport glided between the massive warships, tiny and insignificant among the giants. Santos could see the Eternal Dominion now, the largest ship in the fleet. It was nearly 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons, surrounded by layers of protective vessels. It looked invincible, but nothing was truly invincible. Santos had learned that in 6 months of war, everything had a weakness. You just had to find it. The transport docked without incident. As the team prepared to disembark, Santos gathered them for final instructions. "We have 3 hours before the global attack loses momentum. In 3 hours, The Valorians will regain control of the situation. We need to destroy this ship before that happens. She looked at each of them. Stick to the plan. Move fast. And remember why we are here. Sergeant Tanaka drew her hidden blade, a thin piece of sharpened metal that had been implanted in her forearm. For Earth, she said quietly. For Earth, the others repeated. The airlock opened. They stepped onto the Eternal Dominion. The docking bay was busy with activity. Valorian soldiers and workers rushed back and forth, responding to the crisis on the planet below. No one paid attention to another group of soldiers in captured armor. Santos led the team through the corridors, following maps that Marcus Lee's hackers had stolen from Valorian databases. The Eternal Dominion was a maze of passages and chambers, but they had memorized every turn, every junction, every security checkpoint. The first guards died before they could raise an alarm. Sergeant Tanaka moved like a shadow, her blade slicing through alien throats in perfect silence. Lieutenant Hassan's soldiers followed, killing with precise efficiency. By the time they reached the central elevator shaft, they had eliminated a dozen Valorians without firing a shot. Captain Okonkwo worked on the elevator controls. Security systems are detecting inconsistencies in the docking bay. They will know something is wrong soon. How long do we have? Santos asked. Minutes. Maybe less. Then we move faster. The elevator dropped toward the lower decks. The reactor core was located at the bottom of the ship, protected by multiple layers of security. Each layer would be harder than the last. The doors opened onto a corridor filled with Valorian Marines. These were elite soldiers, the best the Dominion had. They had been positioned to guard the most critical systems of the ship. The fight that followed was brief and brutal. Santos activated her gravity device, and a wave of force threw 3 Marines against the wall. Sergeant Tanaka leaped among them like a dancer of death, her blade finding gaps in armor with impossible precision. Lieutenant Hassan's soldiers fired captured plasma rifles at point-blank range, but the Valorians fought back hard. Their weapons roared, filling the corridor with deadly energy. Humans fell, their lives ending in flashes of light. The Russian sniper died protecting Captain Okonkwo. The Brazilian medic was cut down while trying to help the wounded. By the time the corridor was clear, only 8 of the original 20 remained. Santos did not pause to mourn. There was no time. Keep moving, she ordered. We are almost there. They fought through 2 more checkpoints, losing another soldier at each one. By the time they reached the reactor chamber, only 5 of them remained. Santos, Okonkwo, Tanaka, Hassan, and an Indian explosives expert named Priya Singh. The reactor chamber was enormous, a cathedral of alien technology. At its center, a column of pulsing light stretched from floor to ceiling. This was the heart of the Eternal Dominion, the source of all its power. If they could destroy it, the entire ship would be torn apart. But between them and the reactor stood Supreme Commander Vexter himself. The morning of the attack dawned gray and cold over most of the Earth. Clouds hung low, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. In resistance bunkers and hidden camps across every continent, fighters checked their weapons one last time and said their final prayers. At exactly 6 o'clock, Greenwich Mean Time, the world exploded. In South America, resistance cells attacked every Valorian position simultaneously. In Europe, saboteurs destroyed power stations and communication hubs. In Asia, thousands of fighters emerged from hiding and struck enemy patrols across 36 countries. In Africa, the accumulated weapons of 6 months of raids were finally unleashed. The Valorians had faced attacks before, but nothing like this. This was not a raid or an ambush. This was war on a scale they had never experienced. Alarms blared in every command center. Officers screamed for reinforcements that could not arrive in time. For the first time since the invasion began, the aliens were overwhelmed. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Supreme Commander Vexter stared at the holographic displays in disbelief. The entire planet was on fire. Hundreds of reports flooded in every minute, each one describing another disaster. His forces were stretched thin across too many fronts, unable to concentrate enough strength to crush any single attack. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "They are primitives. They should not be capable of this level of coordination." Admiral Crick stood beside him, his face pale. "Supreme Commander, we have underestimated them. Again, they have been planning this for months. Every cell, every fighter, every weapon they have collected, they are using everything at once. Then, we will respond with everything we have. Order all units to defensive positions. Launch orbital strikes on the largest concentrations of enemy forces." But the orders took time to reach scattered units. Communications were jammed or destroyed. Valorian soldiers who had grown used to easy victories found themselves fighting for their lives against enemies who seemed to know exactly where they would be and how they would respond. While the ground burned, a small ship slipped through the chaos. General Maria Santos sat in the pilot's seat of the captured transport, her mechanical arm steady on the controls. Behind her, 19 of the best fighters humanity had ever produced waited in silence. They wore captured Valorian armor and carried weapons hidden inside their bodies. Each had undergone surgery to implant Dr. Okonkwo's gravity devices beneath their skin, weapons that no scanner could detect. The transport rose through Earth's atmosphere and headed toward the fleet. Santos watched the warships grow larger on the view screen. There were hundreds of them, dark and terrible, blocking out the stars. Any one of them could destroy her little ship in an instant. "Approaching checkpoint," Captain Okonkwo reported from the sensor station. "Broadcasting our stolen codes now." This was the first moment of truth. If the Valorians had changed their codes, if someone recognized that this particular transport had been reported missing, if anything went wrong at all, they would die in a flash of plasma fire. Seconds passed. Then a voice crackled over the radio. "Transport 473, you are cleared for approach to the Eternal Dominion. Proceed to Docking Bay 12. Santos released a breath she did not know she had been holding. "Acknowledged, Control." Proceeding to Bay 12. The transport glided between the massive warships, tiny and insignificant among the giants. Santos could see the Eternal Dominion now, the largest ship in the fleet. It was nearly 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons, surrounded by layers of protective vessels. It looked invincible, but nothing was truly invincible. Santos had learned that in 6 months of war, everything had a weakness. You just had to find it. The transport docked without incident. As the team prepared to disembark, Santos gathered them for final instructions. "We have 3 hours before the global attack loses momentum. In 3 hours, the Valorians will regain control of the situation. We need to destroy this ship before that happens." She looked at each of them. "Stick to the plan. Move fast. And remember why we are here." Sergeant Tanaka drew her hidden blade, a thin piece of sharpened metal that had been implanted in her forearm. "For Earth," she said quietly. "For Earth," the others repeated. The airlock opened. They stepped onto the Eternal Dominion. The docking bay was busy with activity. Valorian soldiers and workers rushed back and forth, responding to the crisis on the planet below. No one paid attention to another group of soldiers in captured armor. Santos led the team through the corridors, following maps that Marcus Lee's hackers had stolen from Valorian databases. The Eternal Dominion was a maze of passages and chambers, but they had memorized every turn, every junction, every security checkpoint. The first guards died before they could raise an alarm. Sergeant Tanaka moved like a shadow, her blade slicing through alien throats in perfect silence. Lieutenant Hassan's soldiers followed, killing with precise efficiency. By the time they reached the central elevator shaft, they had eliminated a dozen Valorians without firing a shot. Captain Okonkwo worked on the elevator controls. Security systems are detecting inconsistencies in the docking bay. They will know something is wrong soon. How long do we have? Santos asked. Minutes. Maybe less. Then we move faster. The elevator dropped toward the lower decks. The reactor core was located at the bottom of the ship, protected by multiple layers of security. Each layer would be harder than the last. The doors opened onto a corridor filled with Valorian Marines. These were elite soldiers, the best the Dominion had. They had been positioned to guard the most critical systems of the ship. The fight that followed was brief and brutal. Santos activated her gravity device, and a wave of force threw 3 Marines against the wall. Sergeant Tanaka leaped among them like a dancer of death, her blade finding gaps in armor with impossible precision. Lieutenant Hassan's soldiers fired captured plasma rifles at point-blank range, but the Valorians fought back hard. Their weapons roared, filling the corridor with deadly energy. Humans fell, their lives ending in flashes of light. The Russian sniper died protecting Captain Okonkwo. The Brazilian medic was cut down while trying to help the wounded. By the time the corridor was clear, only 8 of the original 20 remained. Santos did not pause to mourn. There was no time. Keep moving, she ordered. We are almost there. They fought through 2 more checkpoints, losing another soldier at each one. By the time they reached the reactor chamber, only 5 of them remained. Santos, Okonkwo, Tanaka, Hassan, and an Indian explosives expert named Priya Singh. The reactor chamber was enormous, a cathedral of alien technology. At its center, a column of pulsing light stretched from floor to ceiling. This was the heart of the Eternal Dominion, the source of all its power. If they could destroy it, the entire ship would be torn apart. But between them and the reactor stood Supreme Commander Vexter himself. The Valorian leader had come down from his bridge when the alarm sounded. He stood before the reactor in his battle armor, plasma sword in hand, flanked by his personal guards. Humans, he said, and his voice carried contempt and something else, something that might have been respect. I underestimated your species. That mistake ends now. His guards opened fire. Lieutenant Hassan threw himself in front of the others, his body absorbing shots that would have killed them all. He died without making a sound. Singh and Tanaka engaged the guards while Santos and Okonkwo faced Vexter. The Supreme Commander moved with speed that should have been impossible for such a large creature. His plasma sword hummed through the air, leaving trails of burning light. Santos parried with her mechanical arm, the metal shrieking as plasma burned through it. She countered with her gravity device, but Vexter had his own shields. The force wave splashed against them like water against rock. You fight well, Vexter admitted, but you cannot win. Even if you destroy the ship, the fleet remains. Even if you destroy the fleet, the Dominion will send more. Your species is doomed. Santos smiled through the pain of her burning arm. Maybe, but we will never stop fighting. And someday, we will win. That is what your kind does not understand about us. We do not know how to give up. She activated every gravity device she had, pouring all of their power into a single blast. The force wave hit Vexter like a hammer, cracking his shields and driving him back. For just a moment, he was vulnerable. Okonkwo was waiting for that moment. He had reached the reactor controls, while Santos held the Supreme Commander's attention. His hands flew across the alien interface, inputting the overload sequence they had prepared. It is done, he shouted. The reactor will explode in 3 minutes. Vexter roared in fury and struck Santos with his sword. The blade pierced her chest, a killing blow. but she grabbed his arm with her remaining hand and held on. "Go," she told Okonkwo. Her voice was weak, but her grip was iron. "Get out. Tell them what we did. General, I cannot leave you." "That is an order, Captain." She coughed blood and smiled. "Tell them we did not go quietly." Okonkwo hesitated for one terrible second. Then he ran. Behind him, Santos held on to Vexter with the last of her strength. Tanaka and Singh had fallen, but they had taken the guards with them. It was just the two of them now, human and Valorian, locked in a final embrace. "You think this changes anything?" Vexter snarled. "You are dying. Your friends are dying. Your planet will burn." Santos looked up at him with eyes that held no fear. "I think," she said quietly, "that you have never met anything like us. And I think you're scared." Before he could respond, she activated the last of her gravity devices. This one was not a weapon. It was a bomb. The explosion destroyed the Supreme Commander where he stood. Okonkwo reached the escape pods just as the reactor began to collapse. He threw himself into the nearest one and launched, shooting away from the Eternal Dominion as its heart tore itself apart. From the escape pod's tiny window, he watched the largest warship in the Valorian fleet die. The reactor explosion was not like a bomb. It was like a star being born. Light erupted from the core of the Eternal Dominion, spreading outward in waves of impossible brightness. The ship's shields held for a moment, then failed. Hull plates peeled away like dead leaves. The plasma reactors that powered the weapons went critical, one by one, adding their own explosions to the inferno. The Eternal Dominion broke apart in a cascade of fire. Debris spread across orbit, creating an expanding cloud of burning wreckage. Nearby warships scrambled to move away, but some were too slow. The dying command ship took a dozen escort vessels with it. On the surface of Earth, the Resistance fighters saw the explosion. A new star bloomed in the sky, brighter than the sun for a single perfect moment. At first, no one understood what it meant. Then, the reports came in from orbital observers. The Eternal Dominion was gone. Supreme Commander Vexter was dead. The heart of the Valorian fleet had been destroyed. For the first time in 6 months, humans cheered. The effect on the invasion was immediate and devastating. Without their command ship and their Supreme Commander, the Valorian fleet fell into chaos. Different admirals gave different orders. Some wanted to retreat. Others wanted to attack. Some ships fired on human positions while others simply drifted, their crews uncertain what to do. Admiral Crix, the highest-ranking survivor, tried to restore order, but he had no way to coordinate the fleet. The communication systems had relied on the Eternal Dominion's network, and that network was now scattered debris floating in Earth's orbit. On the ground, the tide turned completely. Valorian units that had been fighting resistance attacks suddenly found themselves without orders, without reinforcements, without hope. Some continued to fight out of stubbornness or fear. Others tried to surrender. A few even tried to flee off-planet, racing for ships that might carry them away from this nightmare world. Captain Okonkwo's escape pod was recovered by a human aircraft 6 hours after the explosion. He was the only survivor of Operation Prometheus. When he stumbled out of the pod, still wearing his damaged Valorian armor, Resistance fighters surrounded him with guns raised. "I am Captain James Okonkwo," he said, raising his hands. "Earth Defense Coalition." The mission was successful. The Supreme Commander is dead. The guns lowered. Someone started to cry. Someone else started to laugh. Within minutes, the news was spreading across the planet. Maria Santos was dead. Ahmed Hassan was dead. Yuki Tanaka, Priya Singh, and 15 other heroes were dead. They had given their lives on an alien ship far from home, fighting against impossible odds. But they had won. The next few weeks saw the complete collapse of the Valorian occupation. Without central command, without their supreme commander's strategic genius, the invaders could not hold their positions. Resistance attacks intensified as humans sensed victory. City after city was liberated. The aliens fell back, then fell back again, and began to die in larger and larger numbers. Admiral Crix eventually gathered the survivors of the fleet, fewer than 200 ships out of the original 400, and retreated from Earth's orbit. His final transmission was intercepted and translated by Marcus Lee's hackers. "We have lost," Crix reported to the Dominion home world. "The humans have defeated us. I am withdrawing all surviving forces. Request instructions." There was a long pause before the reply came. It was from the Supreme Council itself, and it contained just 2 words: "Explain everything." Crix's report traveled across the galaxy, carrying with it the story of what had happened on Earth. The primitives who should have surrendered in days had fought for months. They had learned alien technology faster than anyone thought possible. They had killed more Valorian soldiers than any war in centuries. And in the end, they had destroyed the Supreme Commander himself. On Earth, the celebrations lasted for weeks. But the leaders of the Resistance knew that this was not the end. The Dominion would send more ships. They would come for revenge. Humanity had won a battle, but the war was just beginning. Captain Okonkwo stood in the ruins of Geneva, looking up at the sky. Somewhere out there, the surviving Valorian ships were fleeing toward the stars. Beyond them, an empire of thousands of worlds was learning that a small blue planet had taught them a lesson they would never forget. "We need to get ready," he said to the officers gathered around him. "They will come back. Next time, there will be more of them. We need to be stronger." A young woman stepped forward. She was a scientist who had worked on the gravity devices that had made the mission possible. "We have their technology now," she said. "We know how their ships work. We know how their weapons work. Given time, we can build our own. Then, that is what we will do." Okonkwo turned to face his people. General Santos believed that humanity could survive anything. She was right. We survived the invasion. Now we need to do more than survive. We need to make sure they never threaten us again. He looked up at the stars once more. Somewhere out there was the empire that had tried to destroy them. Somewhere out there were the beings who thought they could conquer Earth. They had learned otherwise. And humanity would make sure they never forgot the lesson. The era of human isolation was over. Ready or not, Earth had entered the galactic stage. And nothing in the universe would ever be the same again. Humans did not fight like Valorians. They were unpredictable, creative, and absolutely unwilling to accept defeat. They adapted to every strategy the Dominion developed. They found weaknesses in defenses that were supposed to be impenetrable. They won battles they should have lost and refused to die when they were supposed to fall. And everywhere they went, they told the same story. They told enslaved species about Earth, about a small blue world that had faced the full might of the Dominion and had not only survived, but triumphed. They told them about ordinary people who had become heroes, about scientists and soldiers and farmers who had stood together against impossible odds. The story spread across the galaxy like fire. Rebellions erupted on worlds that had been quiet for centuries. The Dominion soldiers, who had once felt invincible, began to hesitate. The empire that had ruled unchallenged for 3,000 years started to crumble. 25 years after the invasion of Earth, the final battle was fought at the heart of Valorian space, above the home world of the empire itself. Admiral Okonkwo was 60 years old now, his hair gray and his face lined with decades of war. But his eyes were as sharp as ever, and his hand was steady on the command console as the Alliance fleet prepared for the engagement that would decide the fate of the galaxy. Across from him, the last of the Valorian Grand Armada waited, 1,000 ships, gathered from every corner of their shrinking empire for a final stand. Behind them hung the Valorian homeworld, the seat of their power for 3 millennia. "They are hailing us," the communications officer reported. Okonkwo nodded. "Put it through." The face that appeared on the screen was old, even by Valorian standards. High Priest Zolan had survived all the years of war, watching as his empire collapsed around him. He was the last of the Supreme Council that had ordered the invasion of Earth, the only one who had lived to see the consequences. "Human," Zolan said, and his voice was heavy with defeat. "Is there no way to end this without more death?" "There is," Okonkwo replied. "Surrender. Free every species you have enslaved. Dissolve your empire. Answer for the crimes your people have committed. And if we refuse, then we will destroy you. Not because we hate you, but because we cannot allow what you have done to continue. You have enslaved billions. You have committed genocide against species that dared to resist you. You would have done the same to us. This ends today, one way or another." Zolan was silent for a long moment. Then he laughed bitterly. 3,000 years ago, my ancestors thought they had exterminated your kind. They were wrong. And every generation since has paid the price for that mistake." He shook his head. "We should have listened to Solus. He warned us about you. He said you would be our end." "He was right," Okonkwo said simply. The final battle lasted 18 hours. The Valorians fought with the desperate fury of a dying species, but they could not overcome the combined might of the Galactic Alliance. Ship after ship fell. The defenses of the home world crumbled. When it was over, the Valorian fleet was shattered, and their planet was surrounded by the forces of those they had once conquered. High Priest Zolan surrendered on the steps of the Supreme Council chambers, kneeling before Admiral Okonkwo and a group of officers that included representatives of a dozen species. The ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy, watched by billions who had never known a universe without Valorian rule. "The war is over," Okonkwo announced. "The Dominion is finished. From this day forward, every species in this galaxy is free." The cheering could be heard on worlds light years away. 1 year later, the Galactic Alliance established its capital on a space station in neutral territory, built to be a meeting place for all the species that had joined together to defeat the Dominion. Representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered to write a constitution that would govern their new civilization. Admiral Okonkwo, now retired, was asked to give the opening address. He stood before the assembly, looking out at faces of every shape and color, at beings who would have been enemies a generation ago, but who were now allies and friends. 100 years ago, he began, my species had never traveled beyond our moon. We were alone, isolated, convinced that we were the only intelligent life in the universe. Then the Valorians came, and everything changed. He paused, remembering. They came to destroy us. They thought we were weak, divided, primitive. They thought we would break like every other species they had conquered. They were wrong. We did not break. We fought. We suffered. We lost billions of our people. But we never gave up. And in the end, we won. Not because we were stronger or better equipped, but because we refused to accept defeat. Because when everything seemed hopeless, we kept fighting anyway. He looked at the assembled delegates. That same spirit is what brings us together today. Every species in this room has faced oppression. Every species has suffered. But you are all here because, like humanity, you refused to accept that suffering was your destiny. You fought back. You survived. And now, together, we can build something better. The Galactic Alliance is not just a military alliance or a political union. It is a promise. A promise that no species will ever face conquest alone again. A promise that the strong will protect the weak and the free will liberate the enslaved. A promise that the darkness that covered this galaxy for 3,000 years will never return. He raised his hand in the gesture of unity that the Alliance had adopted, a closed fist opening into an open palm. We are the Alliance. We are free. And we will remain free, now and forever. The assembly rose to its feet, hundreds of beings from hundreds of worlds, united in a single moment of hope. Far away, on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, children played in the rebuilt streets of cities that had once been ruins. They looked up at the sky without fear, knowing that humanity's place among the stars was secure. They learned the stories of the heroes who had saved their world. Maria Santos, Ahmed Hassan, Yuki Tanaka, Priya Singh, and all the others who had given their lives for humanity's future. In the Memorial Garden in Geneva, statues of the 20 heroes of Operation Prometheus stood in a circle around a flame that never went out. Families came to pay their respects. Veterans came to remember. Children came to learn. At the center of the memorial, engraved in stone, were the words that General Santos had spoken before her final mission. Tell them we did not go quietly. They had not gone quietly. They had fought and died and won. And because of them, humanity had risen from a primitive species, struggling on a single world to become one of the leading powers in a galactic civilization. The Valorians had finally found Earth. They had thrown the planet into battle. And in doing so, they had awakened something they could not defeat. The indomitable spirit of a species that refused to surrender, refused to kneel, refused to die. They had found wolves, and the wolves had bitten back. Now those wolves roamed the stars, guardians of the weak, liberators of the enslaved, builders of a new and better galaxy. They had come so far from that first terrible day when alien ships had darkened their sky. And they were just getting started.